Have you ever listened to classical music and thought, wow, it sounds like the melodies are like talking to each other?
It's true. Some of the most captivating melodies in classical music do sound like they're having a conversation.
Yeah, like they're totally interwoven, but you can still hear each distinct voice.
You're hearing counterpoint.
Ah.
That's the beauty of it, where composers create those independent melodies that intertwine seamlessly.
And today we're going to try to unpack that a bit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to be your guides to first species counterpoint, the very foundation of this fascinating technique.
And our source material today dives right in and uses this really cool analogy of intervals as like the DNA of counterpoint.
It's a great way to think about it.
It might sound a bit technical at first, but it's actually pretty intuitive.
Definitely. Think of intervals as the spaces between notes. They determine how those notes relate to each other, kind of like how different ingredients interact to create a recipe.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So like some flavor combinations are just meant to be.
Exactly. And just like that, certain intervals called consonances create that sense of resolution and stability that makes music so pleasing to the ear. Those consonances, they're essential for building a solid counterpoint.
So it's not just about randomly choosing notes.
Not at all. It's about understanding the relationships between them.
And our source material goes beyond just defining these terms. It actually walks us through composing a first species counterpoint melody using F major as an example.
A practical approach is always helpful.
Yeah, totally. And one thing I found really interesting was the emphasis on choosing the right starting note.
Absolutely. And this is where understanding the effect of your choices comes in.
Oh, interesting.
You see, beginning a counterpoint melody on the fifth of the chord, which in F major would be C, can create a sense of instability right from the start.
I see.
It's like starting a story with a jarring plot twist before you've even set the scene.
Okay, so starting on the fifth is like jumping right to the climax of the story. Gotcha. So what's the better approach?
Our source material emphasizes using the root, or the third of the chord, in this case F or A, to create a strong foundation.
It's like you're setting the stage first, right?
Exactly. It's
Okay.
like laying the groundwork for a captivating narrative.
Love that. And once you've got that solid foundation, what's next?
Our source suggests primarily sticking to consonant thirds and sixths as you build the rest of the melody.
Okay.
This creates a smooth and pleasing flow, like the chapters of a well-written book naturally leading into each other.
So it's all about creating that sense of flow and connection between the notes.
Precisely. And to make sure we're paying close attention to those relationships between the notes, the source even suggests writing down the intervals as you go.
Like taking notes while you read.
Exactly. This practice helps you internalize the principles of counterpoint and makes you more aware of the musical choices you're making.
Makes sense. So you're really thinking about each and every note.
Yes, every note contributes to the overall structure and feeling of the melody.
So how do we know when we've reached the end? How do we wrap it up?
For the grand finale, our source recommends landing on a perfect consonance, like an octave.
Okay.
This creates a sense of closure. Think of it as the satisfying resolution to a musical journey.
I like that. So to recap, we choose a starting note from the tonic chord, but not the fifth. We create our melody using mostly thirds and sixths, all while paying close attention to those intervals. And finally, we land gracefully on a perfect consonance for a satisfying ending. Sounds pretty straightforward when you break it down like that.
It is. And to demonstrate just how adaptable this technique is, let's shift gears and imagine our Cantus Firmus, the melody we're building upon, is in D major, but with a twist. This time it's on top mimicking a soprano line, which, as you might know, is usually the highest voice in a choral arrangement.
Ooh, a change in perspective. Does that change the way we approach building our counterpoint melody?
Not at all. The chord principles remain constant even when the Cantus Firmus shifts positions. We still want to select our starting note from the D major chord, which consists of D, F sharp, and A.
So no, starting on the fifth, which in this case is A. Yeah.
Exactly. We want to ensure that our counterpoint begins on a stable foundation. So either D or F sharp would be excellent choices.
Got it. And we're still aiming for those consonant thirds and sixths to build the rest of our counterpoint melody?
Precisely. It's like having a set of tools that you can use in a variety of situations. The key is understanding how those tools function and applying them creatively.
This is reminding me of something else you mentioned, composing in E minor. It's another key, but the core principles are the same. We identify our tonic chord, E, G, and B. And we're still avoiding starting on the fifth, which would be B in this case, right?
You're getting it. But composing in a minor key adds a little nuance. Remember, we're aiming for a strong resolution. And in minor keys, we often raise the leading tone, which in E minor would be D sharp, to create that yearning, pulling you home kind of feeling.
Ah, so that leading tone adds this extra layer of emotion and drama to the music. It's like you're adding this extra emotional depth, right? This yearning feeling.
It really does add another dimension to the music.
Yeah.
But, as much as we're enjoying kind of dissecting these individual elements,
Right.
there's a bigger picture here that our source material emphasizes.
Oh, yeah. Like so.
It's the importance of not getting so caught up in the technicalities
Mhm.
that we forget the heart of music, the feeling, the expression.
Oh, totally. We don't want it to just sound like a dry exercise.
Exactly. It's like learning all the grammar rules, but never actually writing a story.
Right. We're not robots just spitting out notes. So how do we bring our counterpoint to life? I remember the source material had some cool ideas about this.
It did. It encouraged us to experiment with things like tempo dynamics and even instrumentation to take those counterpoint exercises and turn them into actual pieces of music.
Ooh, I like that. So it's like taking a basic recipe and then getting creative with different cooking techniques or presentation to create something really memorable.
A perfect analogy. Just imagine taking one of your counterpoint melodies and playing it on a harpsichord and then on a cello, and then with a full orchestra. The possibilities are truly endless.
Now that's what I call bringing it to life. And this next point I think really resonated with me. Our source material really emphasizes the importance of not just writing counterpoint, but truly hearing and internalizing those sounds as we create them.
Absolutely. It even suggests singing each line as we compose, which I know might sound a bit strange at first,
It does.
but trust me on this one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
When we sing the lines, we feel the intervals, we sense the movement, and the music comes alive in a whole new way.
So it's like an embodied experience, right?
Exactly. It's like the difference between reading a travel brochure and actually experiencing the destination.
I love that. So let's put ourselves in the composer's seat for a moment. Okay, we've explored F major, D major, E minor. How about we try our hand at composing a first species counterpoint melody against a Cantus Firmus in C major?
Excellent choice. C major, being such a familiar key, provides a great soundscape to apply what we've learned. Let's imagine our Cantus Firmus begins on the note C.
Okay, C major starting on C. Now, if we want to create our counterpoint melody, we have to pick a starting note from the C major chord, right?
We got it.
So C, E, or G would be our options. But remember, no, starting on the fifth.
Right. We've got to avoid that instability.
Exactly. And in this case, since we're in C major, that would be G.
You got it. Starting our counterpoint on G would create that instability that we talked about earlier. We want to start on a firm foundation.
Exactly. So we're left with C or E as our starting points. Decisions. I'm feeling adventurous. Let's start on E. It creates that nice stable third right from the get-go.
Excellent choice. You're really getting the hang of this. Now, as we continue building our counterpoint melody, remember those consonant thirds and sixths? They are our building blocks for a harmonious musical line.
Right. Like our trusty tools.
Precisely.
And we can't forget about those different types of melodic motion. Contrary, parallel, oblique. We want to make sure our counterpoint sounds like a dynamic conversation, not like some robotic exercise.
Precisely. And here's the beauty of it. There are multiple correct ways to approach this. It's all about making conscious choices that align with your musical intentions.
That's what makes counterpoint so fascinating. This beautiful dance between structure and freedom. As we're nearing the end of our deep dive into first species counterpoint, it strikes me that, we've been so focused on actually composing and the intricacies of counterpoint that we haven't really talked about how this knowledge, how can we actually use this? How can this change the way we listen to music?
That's a great point. It's like we've unlocked a secret code, right, to understanding the tapestry of classical music.
Totally. Like imagine putting on your favorite Bach fugue or a Mozart symphony now.
Yeah.
But now we're armed with this understanding of first species counterpoint.
Exactly. You start to hear those independent melodies like they're having a conversation.
Right. And you can appreciate why they sound so good together.
Exactly. You start to notice how those carefully chosen intervals, those consonant thirds and sixths, create this sense of balance and harmony.
Yeah. It's like suddenly understanding the architectural brilliance of a building you've walked by 1,000 times.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So, as a little challenge to our listeners, I encourage you to put on those counterpoint ears. The next time you listen to music, really try to pick out those individual melodies.
Yeah. See if you can hear those conversations happening.
Listen for those consonant intervals, those thirds and sixths that create such a pleasing effect. Pay attention to how the melodies move. Are they moving in contrary motion, creating that conversational effect?
It's like a whole new way to experience music.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the more you listen through this lens, the more those subtle details will reveal themselves.
It's true, and the best part is you don't have to be a musical genius to appreciate it.
Exactly. This knowledge opens up a whole new world of musical enjoyment for anyone willing to listen closely.
It's like you're in on a secret handshake, right? You start to understand this language that composers have been using for centuries.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire some of our listeners to try their hand at composing their own counterpoint melodies.
That would be amazing.
And even if you don't have aspirations to be the next Bach or Mozart, just this newfound knowledge will undoubtedly deepen your appreciation for the intricate beauty of music.
It's true. It's like you've gained this whole new level of fluency in the language of music. And on that note, we'll let you go for today. But be sure to join us next time as we delve even further into the fascinating world of counterpoint. Until then, happy listening. Ever catch yourself listening to a piece of music and thinking, wow, how'd they do that? Like, how do you even begin to create something so intricate and beautiful?
It's like there's this hidden language, this code beneath the surface, and once you crack it, a whole new world of musical possibility opens up.
Well, get ready to decode, everyone, because today we're tackling first species counterpoint.
Which might sound a tad dry, I'll admit, but trust me, it's anything but. We're diving into this fascinating lecture transcript, and let me tell you, it's packed with those aha moments.
The kind that make you appreciate music and maybe even creativity itself in a whole new light.
Exactly. See, with counterpoint, you're not just dealing with a single melody strutting its stuff. It's more like a conversation, multiple melodic lines happening all at once.
Okay, so instead of one voice, you've got, what, a whole choir of melodies interacting?
Precisely. Each line with its own personality, its own journey, and yet they weave together to create something so much richer, so much more dynamic than any one of them could achieve alone.
I'm already hooked. So where does this first species thing come in?
Ah, good question. First species counterpoint is like the foundation, the ground floor. It's all about using these really specific intervals, mainly octaves and fifths.
Octaves and fifths. Those are like music theory 101, right?
Exactly. They're considered the most stable, the most consonant intervals in Western music. Think of them as the pillars holding up the whole harmonic structure.
Solid ground. Got it. But there's always a but, isn't there? I mean, music can't be all stability and consonance, can it? Where does the excitement come in?
You're right. It'd be pretty boring if that's all there was to it. And that's where the rules come in. Or, maybe more accurately, how you play within those rules.
Ooh, there's that tension again. Rules ain't need play sounds like my kind of party. What kind of rules are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, you can't just have those melodic lines moving in perfect lockstep, especially when it comes to octaves and fifths.
You mean like they can't be singing the same tune just a few notes apart?
Exactly. That's called parallel motion, and it's a big no-no in counterpoint.
Is it because it just sounds, I don't know, too predictable, too boring?
That's part of it. It creates this sound that's almost too unified, too. Plain. Like those matching outfits. Couples wear cute in theory, but a little much in practice.
Okay, I can see how that would take away from the whole conversation aspect we were talking about earlier. So if parallel motion is a no-go, what's the alternative?
Contrary motion. Instead of mirroring each other, the lines move in opposite directions.
Ah, so when one voice goes up, the other goes down, like a musical seesaw.
You got it. And the simple rule, this back and forth movement, it injects this incredible sense of life, of interplay between the different voices.
So even though there are rules, there's still this element of like surprise and delight in how the music unfolds.
Exactly. It's like a dance, a carefully choreographed dance where every step, every movement serves a purpose. But within that structure, there's still room for improvisation, for those unexpected moments of brilliance.
Now that's what I'm talking about. Rules that don't stifle creativity, but actually enhance it. It's like they say, limitations breed innovation.
And first species counterpoint is a perfect example of that. In fact, there's even a forbidden interval that this lecturer admits to secretly loving.
Wait, a forbidden interval? Now you've really piqued my interest. Spill the tea. Which interval is it, and why is it considered so taboo?
Well, it's not so much a specific interval itself, but how you get there. Remember how we were talking about parallel motion being a no-no?
Right, like when the voices are moving in the same direction, especially with octaves and fifths.
Exactly. But sometimes, and this is where it gets interesting, a composer might throw in a little parallel motion on purpose.
A rule break for dramatic effect? I'm in.
It's all about context, you see. Like, the lecturer talks about this moment where he's analyzing a piece, and there's this fifth that's approached through parallel motion. And instead of being like, nope, totally wrong, red pen, next.
Yeah.
He actually loves it.
Because it adds a little something special, a little spice to the mix.
Precisely. He even plays the phrase twice, once with the correct contrary motion and once with the parallel approach. Want to hear the difference?
Get me with it.
Okay, listen closely. Plays phrase with contrary motion leading to the fifth. All right, and here it is with the parallel motion. Plays the phrase again, this time with parallel motion leading to the fifth.
Oh, wow. You weren't kidding. That parallel fifth, it's like it just leaps out at you in a good way. There's this like intensity to it that wasn't there before.
Exactly. It's unexpected, maybe even a little bit edgy.
Right.
But it totally works, right?
Totally. It's like sometimes those mistakes, those moments where you color outside the lines, those are the things that really make a piece of art come alive.
And that's what makes studying these old techniques so fascinating. It's not about being a stickler for the rules. It's about understanding the why behind them.
And knowing when to break them for maximum impact. So we've got contrary motion, we've got those subtly subversive parallel approaches. What other counterpoint tricks do you have up your sleeve?
Ah, but of course there's more. Let's talk about voice exchange.
Voice exchange. Okay, that sounds intriguing. Lay it on me.
Imagine you have two people having a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And in the middle of it, they just switch roles. Like one picks up the other's train of thought and the other one responds in kind.
So it's like they're trading places, musically speaking.
Exactly. It's like a musical switcheroo.
Mm.
And it creates this really cool effect where you think you know where the music is going, but then bam, it takes you by surprise.
And musically, how does that even work? Did the melodies just like swap notes or something?
It's wild, right? So
Yeah.
picture this. You've got one line going up, let's say from a G to a B, while the other line's going down from a B to a G. Voice exchange is literally them trading places. The melody that started on G ends up on B, and the one that started on B ends up on G.
Whoa, a total melodic switcheroo. It's like those optical illusions where you think you're seeing one thing, but then boom, your brain flips the script. So this voice exchange thing, it's not just some random trick, right?
Yeah,
I bet it serves a real purpose in the music.
you know it. Remember we were talking about how limitations can actually spark creativity?
Yeah, like those composers back in the day, they had all these rules to follow, but they still managed to create some seriously mind-blowing music.
Exactly. And voice exchange is a prime example. It's like by swapping the voices, they introduce this element of surprise, this little jolt to your expectations, but it's all still within the bounds of those first species counterpoint rules.
So it's like a little wink from the composer of a, hey, I can follow the rules and do still blow your mind.
You got it. And that's what I love about diving into these musical deep dives with you. What seems like just a bunch of technical jargon on the surface.
Yeah, like who even cares about first species counterpoint? Right.
Right. But when you really dig in, you realize it's about so much more than just notes and intervals. It's about those underlying principles of creativity, the push and pull between structure and freedom. And those are principles that apply to, well, pretty much everything.
Totally. Whether you're writing a song, designing a building, or even just trying to solve a problem at work, it's like those constraints, those limitations, they can actually be a catalyst for some seriously amazing breakthroughs.
100%. It's like that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes having those boundaries, those rules to work within, it forces you to think differently, to come up with solutions you might never have considered otherwise.
So instead of freaking out when things get tough, when we feel limited or stuck, maybe the answer is to embrace those limitations.
And see what happens. You might be surprised by what you're able to create within those boundaries.
Now that's a takeaway I can get behind. Well, folks, that pretty much wraps up our deep dive into the wonderful and surprisingly relevant world of first species counterpoint.
Who knew something so old school could be so insightful, right?
It just goes to show sometimes the best way to move forward is to look back and learn from the masters. Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying and remember those limitations. They might just be your secret weapon to something amazing.